Welcome, everybody. There's another episode of the Spine and Rehab Specialist Podcast. It's been a little while since we've had one, so we'll make this a good one. Today, we're celebrating two events. It is National Athletic Training Month, and it is also Women's History Month. So what better way to have a podcast with three female athletic trainers with a lot of history behind them in the athletic training field. So with me today, I have Maria Tuck. Hello, Maria.
Hello.
Maria is the trainer at Jefferson High School for a long number of years.
32 years.
32 years. Then we have Bonnie at Heredia-Koster, who's also my wife, but has been an athletic trainer for almost 40 years. Initially in a clinic setting with the El Paso Orthopedic Surgery Group, and then she came on board here at Spine and Rehab Specialists as part of management. And then we have Don Hearn, now retired, former athletic trainer, head trainer, director of sports medicine for the UTEP Miners, University of Texas at El Paso. She is retired, so we did have to get her out of her vegetable beds in TRC, but she made it down here. So
thanks for having me.
Yes. All right. So let's start. A question for all three of you guys. What got you into the athletic training field? What got you interested? What got you hooked? And when was that? Maria.
When I was going into my sophomore year at Burgess High School, that summer I was volunteering at R.E. Thomason High School, which is now UMC, and I met another student volunteer, and she was a student athletic training aide at Burgess High School. She made it sound fun. So when I got to Burgess, I went to the training room and I met Mr. Manny Pasillas, who's a legend in the athletic training community. And I started up then. So I guess I came into it since I've been doing it since I was 15 years old in one setting or another.
Yeah. All right. Great. Bonnie?
My freshman year, my health class, I had Terry Patillo, who was a female athletic trainer at Bel Air. And she came up to me within the first month of attending high school and asked me, how would you want to be a student athletic trainer? I had no idea. And she said, I just need you to stay after school and let me know if you like it. And I fell in love with it. So that's when I
also
started.
going back to high school. Don?
Well, I had no idea what I what I was getting into when I started. I went to college in fishery and wildlife biology. I already figured out how I could be a forest ranger out in my big 40-foot tower, looking for fires. But after a year and a half of college, I kept complaining to my mom, all I keep doing is taking chemistry classes, biology classes, and being told, if I get a job at one of the parks, I might make $12,000. Well, you can make $12,000 flipping burgers. So she kept telling me, go talk to somebody in PE. Well, I didn't want to be a PE teacher. Back then, your physical education teachers were roll out the ball and you go play for an hour, so I didn't want to do that. So I eventually listened to my mom and went and talked to one of the advisors. And back then, kines was just a little branch of physical education. Physical education at Iowa State was huge. And so I went and talked to one of the advisors, and she spent a lot of time talking to me, and she goes, I know just the person you need to meet, and took me down to the head women's athletic trainer at Iowa State. And Alice McLean's like, yeah, come on in, see if you like it. And so, I met one of my best friends, still my best friend to this day. She started that same semester and, just jumped in with both feet and ended up being my career.
Yeah.
Never dreamed of it, so I had no idea what I was getting into.
We kind of get dragged into it, don't we?
Yes.
It's funny. So my original career choice was also something with forestry, agriculture, and I also didn't like the chemistry aspect.
No.
There's also not a lot of forest in the Netherlands, so it wouldn't have been a great career anyway. But all right. So I know when you guys got into the field, it was a male-dominated field, like athletic training. So can you talk a little bit about some of the barriers that you ran into, Bonnie?
I think for me, being in high school, it was kind of hard because they kind of saw the girls that got into athletic training was because they could work football and be around the boys. And when I was at Bel Air, we had a female athletic trainer that kind of got in trouble because of that. So they were going to restrict it. And you could work any other sport, but you couldn't work football. And so my head trainer was Rich Color. And he told me, you need to really, really be able to prove that this is really what you want to do as your career choice. Back then we had Kramer products, and Kramer had a clinic at SMU in the summer for a week on sports medicine. So he gave me the handout, and I took it home, and I told my dad, I really want to go because this is really what I want to do, and I want to work football. So I went, and that's how I got to work football in high school.
Yeah. But even at MSU, I know you've told me that they did not want a girl to, female student trainer to travel with football. That just wasn't being done.
They didn't want a female to travel. So once again, my head trainer was Rick Color. He taught me how to tape flawlessly without a wrinkle, and I could out tape everybody there. So therefore I got to travel. It was really hard because I had to tape in the shower, and I had to tape in the restroom, and that was really, really difficult. I don't think that they have to do that now.
Probably not. I think it's changed a little bit. So, Don, I know when you became the head trainer at UTEP, you were the second Division I head trainer that was also responsible for football. Is that correct?
Yes.
In the nation?
Yes. Yeah. I was kind of a pioneer, but I never really looked at it like that. Everybody always reminds me, but like Bonnie, we definitely had challenges. When I started at Iowa State, actually, the athletic director that was there when I first started did not allow females down at football. So, but I didn't know that. I had no, like I said, my first semester, I really didn't know what I was getting into. I just observed and jumped in with both feet. But then that fall, we changed athletic directors, and our first two female student trainers, because it was a split program back there. But both the head trainers knew that if we wanted to be, get a good education and athletic training, you had to work football because you see injuries in football you don't see in other sports. At Iowa State, we had gymnastics, wrestling, we had some other big contact sports. But still, you aren't going to see that kind of stuff in football. But I had a big challenge. I guess my year when I went down to football, my philosophy was, I got to be better than the guys if I want to, if I want to make it, and I got to stand out to the head trainer so he'll help me. And so I always, I always had a lot of fun taping. To me, it was always a game. So I always made sure every time I taped next to the head trainer so I could get faster. So I'd race him. He didn't know I was racing him, but, he figured it out pretty quick and he made it really hard. But, I figured if I could keep up with him, and he obviously saw that, because he was very influential in getting me down here to UTEP. So, but again, I feel like we had to be better than the guys to, make an impression. What I was going to say is we had a guy go down at football practice and I was attending to him. He had an ankle and I was just starting to ask him questions, and a freshman male student trainer came and knocked me out of the way. And I didn't want to make a scene, so I kind of walked away. And I went to the head trainer afterwards and I said, I came down here to improve my evaluation skills. And I said, one of the tasks that I was assigned was computers were first out. And I'm still not a computer person at all. And so one of my tasks was to enter all the treatments into the computer. So one day a week, I'd have to spend, instead of going out to practice, I'd have to spend sitting in front of a computer. And that's not why I went down to football, So I made it real clear, and we had a nice little discussion, and he told me to get out of his office and go do my job. And I did, and, I made an impression because I told him that's what I wanted to do,
Yeah.
So
now at UTEP, I think every single student trainer is female.
Really?
I don't think they have a single male. It's kind of interesting. So let's talk a little bit about misconceptions about what athletic trainers do, because, if even if you've been an athlete and didn't get hurt, you probably think that all athletic trainers do is tape ankles and hand out water, which obviously, yes, you do that. And I've seen you taping in the training room so many times. And I look at it like, yeah, I can probably tape an ankle, although nobody would want that tape job, but you would have taped 20 guys against my one. But there's a whole lot more to the athletic training field. So, Maria, talk a little bit about that. What is, like your everyday stuff beyond taping and handing out water?
You know what? We do so little taping at my high school. It's really not something that's, not something we rely on.
Yeah.
I would say most of our day is spent on rehabilitation. These kids come in with, terrible posture. Every single teenager has horrible posture. They have, bad gaits when you see them walking, muscle imbalances, you name it. So we spend a lot of our time trying to fix those issues so that they can have that success in their sport. Obviously, the documentation now, computers, when computers came in, all of a sudden we had paperwork to do. So injury reports, notes, stuff like that. Keeping up with my student athletic training aides is, I feel like, a full-time job sometimes. I have a small army of them, but it's like an army of squirrels, so trying to figure out where they are all the time. But most of our time is done, is that, we're covering practices, making sure that everybody's where they need to be. The coaches are aware of what's going on. But most people see us on a game day. And if it's a great day, I'm not doing anything.
Yeah.
It's like the iceberg. You see the tip of the iceberg. You didn't see everything that happened before tip off, before we started. That's where all the work comes in, you know?
And also when something happens, that's all of a sudden when you go in overdrive.
Right, exactly. We're in this constant, we're true first responders. We're the only healthcare profession that will be there when the person gets injured. We're there from the moment it happens until that injury is resolved and they return. And so we get to see it all. And so people think, oh, you're just relaxing, watching a game. And in the middle of a sentence, I'm out in the middle of a field or a court before they even know what's happened, because we've always got that eye on what's going on. And people always go like, I didn't even see that. I said, well, it was my job to see that. We can be sitting here having a conversation, but I still know everything that's going on in front of me. So that's a lot of it also. It's all the preparation, just setting up the fields, making sure that, everyone's picked up their water, picked up their ice. Did coach get their first aid kit before they got on the bus? Did we make the bus? Things of that nature.
Yeah. And Don, on your end, it's not just the orthopedic health of the players, right? That, of course, you're assessing the injuries, you're rehabbing the injuries, but there's so much more to it. And you want to talk a little bit about like the sickle cell trait, the heat exhaustion, mental health. How much is on your plate as an athletic trainer at the college level that you need to deal with?
Well, I know the first year when I took over and Dave went up to UNM, I called him. We were halfway through camp, and I said, Dave, what's going on? I didn't change. We still have Powerade everywhere. We're, hydrating them. We got our ice towels. We're doing everything. But yet I got these guys cramping like crazy. He goes, ask them how many are on creatine. That was when creatine first came out. And so I ended up sending my guys to the hospital because I couldn't catch, there's no way that they're going to catch up just drinking once they start cramping like that. And so, he's like, well, I got it easy. I'm associated with the hospital, so I have all my IVs here. And I'm like, okay, whatever. But, the heat is definitely a huge thing. They made it mandatory for us to sickle cell trade. I can't even tell you what year that was, but we were already doing it. Dave was doing it when I first got to UTEP back in 1988, so we were already doing that. The mental health is really kicked in, and you almost have to have, it's really hard here in this city of El Paso, as Maria can attest to too. There is not a sports related psychologist that I knew of when I was still working.
Yeah.
And we did have somebody when I first started, and I can't even remember his name, but I remember he moved to Tennessee. But by not having somebody like that, we worked with our in-house there at UTEP, our psychology department, the counseling center, but of course we had to go off campus too for a lot of stuff. But that is a huge component now, and it's really come to light with all the professional athletes, the Olympic athletes that have, made it so the college athletes, the high school athletes will actually come and talk to us now, and they don't see it as you know something bad. Everybody goes through it.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I always had a hard time because I'm a strong person. So, but I do have a soft spot right now and then.
Yeah, definitely. And then Bonnie, of course, you took the non-traditional route. You were not in high schools or college, but you were in a clinic setting. I want to talk a little bit about where else are athletic trainers working beyond that traditional setting? Again, the misconceptions about athletic training that you're only working in high school or college. You can work in a whole bunch of different settings.
I think they're working a lot with the military. I think we have a bunch in the military. I think we have them at all the academies, FBI Academy, Border Patrol, Customs. Everybody has an athletic trainer. I think there's a lot in industry. I think Google, Facebook. I think they all employ athletic trainers. And we even have industrial athletic trainers in El Paso. So I think that's what has made it difficult for the high schools and the colleges to hire, is because it's gotten so diverse. And you have trainers with NASCAR, with the Rockettes, with all the ballet companies. So I think they've just become very, very diverse. I think one of the things that the reason I think this has happened is we learn how to rehab as an athletic trainer, to rehab quick, because there's always a deadline. There's always urgency.
Yes.
You got to get that athlete back. Go, 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 go. And I think as a clinical athletic trainer, back when I first started, we learned how to rehab so fast, where the PTs were slower. And I think that's where I was able to succeed, because to me, a 35-year-old with a meniscectomy was the same thing as the 20-year-old athlete in high school or in college with a meniscectomy. So I think that's why we've been able to succeed in industries now, in all these diverse fields, is because we learn how to rehab quickly. Go, go, go. Get them back. Get them back. We're always under the gun.
Yeah, and I can definitely see that as a physical therapist. We typically see a patient 2 or 3 times a week, and yeah, you get them better when you get them better. As an athletic trainer, a lot of times you see the patient more often because there is more of that drive to get them back, whether it's an athlete or what we call a tactical athlete in the military, or the police, department or firefighter needs to go back to work. It's a workers' comp injury. It's the same thing. They need to go back, to their job, whether that's athletics or something else, as quickly as possible. So, next question: why did you stay in the field this long? Right, because combined, you guys are over 100 years experience.
Ouch.
Combined somewhere.
Wow.
Combined, I've known all of you guys for 100 years. Well, all three of you guys are in the Hall of Fame for the Sun City Athletic Training Association, right? So you're Hall of Famers. So why did you stay in it, Maria?
You know what? It's one of those things. I had no intention of becoming an athletic trainer. When I went to UTEP, I enjoyed it in high school, and I thought, well, I'll continue doing it in college. And my plan was actually to go to medical school. And I saw what we were doing every day out in the field. And, David Binder had to force me to graduate because I thought, man, this is great. And my thoughts of medical school quickly left. So I got the job at Jefferson, and I really enjoyed it. It's fast paced. Every day is different. I get to go outside, and when I don't want to go outside, I can stay inside if it's snowing or raining. And I just really enjoyed it. I did try to leave once when after I gave birth to DJ, my first child, and that job just didn't work out. It just fell through, and I thought, well, then this is where I'm supposed to be, and I just kept going ever since then.
Yeah.
And I just really cannot imagine. And my entire career has been at Jefferson High School. I can't imagine being somewhere else. I can't imagine not seeing, those athletes and those teenagers every day, which is probably why I haven't retired. I don't think I know how to retire. So,
Bonnie, same question. Why have you stayed in the athletic training field for this long?
I think because I always loved it and I've always loved athletics. And I think I went the clinical route because I wanted to work. I didn't know how I would work with just one age group. And I wanted to work with all these different ages. And I wanted to get really, really good at my rehab skills. But I was lucky in the fact that I got to work in the clinic, but I also got to volunteer at UTEP. And that kept me in the athletic realm and kept me current on what was going on, but yet let me excel in the clinical route. So that's why I think I've stayed in it. And if you look at us, most of it, I've had 2 jobs. Maria's had one. Don's had one job.
Yeah.
So so it's
Exactly.
literally.
Well, I had one for 8 months before.
Literally, just the love of the profession, I think.
Yeah. Don, same question. Why did you stay in? I know you're retired now, but why did you stay in it for all these years?
To me, what's better in college athletics?
High school athletics.
Clinic athletic training. There you go.
High school, if you want your summers off, your Sundays and holidays, it was certainly a grind. But if I didn't like it, why'd I stay?
Yeah.
I mean, I loved it. I love the profession. I got out when it was time for Dawn to get out, and I didn't. I'm old school, so my philosophy doesn't align as well in athletic training as it used to. My work-life balance was I married my job, and I definitely see a need for the way the profession has gone now, but that's not Dawn Hearn athletic training. So yeah, I retired early, but I think I put my time in, and I'm proud of my career, and I loved it. What. I get my fix when I come back. I'm on the Hall of Fame committee. So Hall of Fame weekend, I get my fix of seeing all those athletes. When they have the reunions with the teams come back, I always try and come back. When they had Coach Haskins, when they unveiled the bronze statue, I got to see all those old basketball players. And I didn't work with them, but because I was here at UTEP for so long, they knew me and they come see me. So that,
Yeah. They stay
what could
around.
be better than that,
Yeah. Exactly.
So.
All right, let's talk about your worst injury you've seen. Maria.
Well, Jefferson is called triage high by the other athletic trainers. So everything that Dawn and Binder said I would not see in a high school athletic setting, I have seen. We saw a actual hip dislocation, spiral fracture of a femur in a female soccer player, 2 fractured skulls. We had a spontaneous pneumothorax. But the one that really haunts me, I had a young lady who miscarried in the middle of the night and hadn't told her parents she was pregnant yet. So she wakes up and she comes to basketball practice at 6 a.m. And so coach sends her to me, goes, "Man, can you talk to her? Something's going on with her stomach." And I talk to her, she breaks down, she tells me that she had miscarried. And this was 6 hours previously. Wow. So that's a really fun call to make to a parent. Luckily, parent was super understanding. She got to the hospital. She was able to avoid sepsis and everything. But that's one that I was definitely not prepared for.
Yeah.
I can see that.
We did not go over that in our emergency medicine class at UTEP. I can say that.
But it still falls on your plate, doesn't it?
It
It does.
Much, again, I'm at a high school. Jefferson High School is predominantly a low-income high school. And for a lot of these kids, I am their healthcare provider.
Yeah.
I've had parents bring a kid in and say, "Well, we think it's broken. What do you think?" Yes, it's broken. Go to the hospital. But the fact that they respect your opinion that much is they're like, "Well, let's go see Miss Tuck first, and then we'll go to the hospital." Yeah. That says a lot. And so I figured that I've done a good job if people are willing to trust us in that way. But when you're in a high school, everything falls on your plate. We've had to attend to fans in the stands who collapse for one reason or another. That's nowhere in my job description. But again, we're part of a small community, and so we're always first responders. And so we'll go up there, see what's going on, and if we need to call EMS or get one of our doctors up there or something, we'll do that as well.
Yeah, because as a physical therapist, I'm pretty much never the first responder. I see them afterwards, days, weeks, months later. So
Yeah, I get to see it all. So, but like I said, luckily for all the students who had all those terrible injuries, they all healed, they all came back, they were all great afterwards. But it's always a learning experience, and that's where you have to have that. Always have that first responder mentality and have that sense of urgency.
Yeah.
Because when they call us, I just never know what's on the other side.
yeah,
Just never know.
player is down. Well, who knows what it is,
I
right?
got a call that a player was bleeding. There was blood all over the floor in the gym. And I go over there and the player's not there and the coach isn't there. Jefferson is an old school. Well, now we have a new building, but it was this older school. And we had swinging wood and glass doors between the gym and the main building, back just like the old movies. And he went diving for the ball and his arm went through the glass and he was okay, but then he pulled his arm back out. And he cut an artery in his arm. And luckily, the Coach Harper was so smart. He was a science teacher. Wrapped it up, picked him up, and ran across the street. Luckily, we have, a hospital across the street, literally. And by the time I got there, it was just more blood cleanup. The kid was already in surgery within 30 minutes. And he regained the doctor, R.A. Thomason at the time, did a fabulous job. And the kid regained full function, full nerve use, everything.
Awesome.
So again, you never know what's in
I
it.
had the same thing with a kid. They were going out to the football game and went, missed the panic bar and went right through the window. Same thing. Okay, going through, but came back and got the artery. Same thing.
Yeah.
So you just never. They were going out to the game. The game hadn't started yet. It was still in the training room. I wasn't ready for that yet.
Bonnie, what's your worst injury that you've seen?
I think the worst injury that I saw in the clinic was probably a police officer that was cut off as he was going, and he literally flipped over the car and landed on the pavement. He had an external fixator on his ankle, and on the other side, he had to have surgery because he shattered his femur and they had to put a rod, and then he injured his shoulder. So he was in rehab and therapy with us probably for a year.
Wow.
Well, Don, what's your worst injury that you've seen?
Lindsay Vons. That was pretty nasty. But as soon as they kept saying all these multiple surgeries, they never said until the very end. But we all knew right away it was compartment.
Yeah.
Because that was, it didn't look like that bad an injury. But no, I had my fair share. But probably one of my worst ones, the most blood, was back when I was a grad student at my high school. And I had my right fielder and my first baseman collide. And they were both catchers by trade, so they both had a little size to them. And as I was still in the training room because I had, it was, I was a grad student and I was at a little bitty high school in Ohio, so I had high school and junior high. It was all right there in the same building. So I had high school baseball, softball, and junior high track all going. So I'm just walking out. My kids at the baseball field. Softball's kind of a ways away, so they were kind of on their own. So I'm just going out to the field, and you see like 6 football players running towards me. I said, "What field?" They're like, "Baseball." And then I was like, "Yell at me." So I just took off and started running, and I can see them out on the field. They're right out there between the right field and first base, and they had collided and both hit each other right here. One kid's nose was sitting like this. They both had huge gashes. One of the moms was out there, had the kid propped up, and the kid that was laying in the fetal position, not moving. I'm like, "George, what's going on?" I'm trying to talk to him as I'm approaching. He goes, "Don, I'm okay. What about," I can't remember the other kid's name. "What about so-and-so?" I'm like, "Well, he can lay in the fetal position and not move. That blood can run all at once right now." Because the other kid was out of it. They both had concussions. When they set the one kid's nose, he said, "That's not right. Do it again." Great kids. That's the beauty of working at high school, because those kids appreciate you so much, and the parents do too. I had that some at the collegiate level, and it got to be a lot more as I went on. But I also had a dislocated hip. Numerous concussions that we would disqualify the kids. Once we learn more and more and more, that was another big thing that changed in our field was, back when we first started, we actually had a neurologist on the sideline, and we'd have a kid with a concussion. We'd take him over to Dr. Schneider, and he'd say, well, evaluate him. And it was, back then we had three, if you didn't lose any consciousness, once your symptoms were gone, which, as well as I do, those symptoms probably weren't gone, but they said they were, they could go back in the game. If they lost consciousness for under a minute, they were out. I think it was just that day. If it was more than a minute, then it was a week. Or no, if it was up to a minute, it was a week.
A week.
And then after that, it really ranged. And so, Doc would be like, well, let's see how they are after halftime. And we had a kid that played the second half, and to this day, it was his best game of his life. He doesn't remember. And another time, they're like, hey, Don, you need to go see so-and-so. And I have guys standing in the end zone, big defensive tackle, like 6'5", 290. And he's standing there with his head slumped down. And I get over there and I said, hey, dude, what's up? I hurt my neck. And I was like, okay. And so as I talked to him, I almost brought the spine board out and spine boarded him standing up. I was that close to doing that. But, yeah, he had a little fracture. So it was, just crazy. He's still standing there. So how can it be that bad, right? Yeah.
Who knows?
Exactly.
Who knows?
And ended his career.
Yeah. So now let's go from the worst injuries to success stories. So maybe somebody that you inspired you. Maria, give me your best story.
Oh my gosh. I've worked in the high school too long, and every kid that graduates is a success story at my school, at Jefferson High School. Every kid that walks through the graduation is a success. We've had so many athletes that were hurt, we were down and out. And, before we had such easy access to, physicians and physical therapists, a lot of therapists came to us and, I had a girl, tear her ACL and we got her back for the next year. First game out, she tears the other ACL. And now we know that's common, and rehab now has changed. So we do more, on both sides, which wasn't happening back then. And she tore that other one. And so third year, we're going to try again. And she completed and she was a huge success with, so that's always good for us. As far as students, we never went out of our way to, make a new athletic trainer. We just got really lucky that some of them saw us and just followed us in. I've got Celeste who, is working as an athletic trainer in New Mexico. I believe she'll be going to Canutillo next year. She was an athlete. She wasn't even injured that often. She just, hung out in the training room. And next thing we know, she decided to become an athletic trainer. I have Karina, who's a MSAT student in New Mexico State. She wants to be an athletic trainer. She keeps asking, when are you leaving? Because, pretty sure she wants my job. She wants my job, I think. Nice. We have, Adri, who is just an amazing student athletic trainer. And she's an officer in the Army now. Just amazing kids. Gabby Ibrahim, who was one of the first students I met when I walked into Jefferson High School in 1994. She was already a student athletic trainer for Jefferson. So it's not like, she came up under me. I was just there for her last 2 years. And she's an amazing athletic trainer. She's currently at Delvaya High School. She's at Horizon for many years.
Awesome.
So I've had students who are doctors and physical therapists and, nurses, speech science pathologists. So with all, through Silva and Jefferson High School, obviously, because, we're Jefferson Silva now. And they're all success stories.
Great. Bonnie?
I think I've had success teaching the last 15 years. I think I have motivated several students to go into athletic training. Everybody goes in wanting to go into physical therapy, but a lot of them did end up going athletic training. And so we'll see.
Good. Don, what are your successes? I know you got tons of them, but...
Yeah, I mean, the one that kind of stands out is we had a kid that came in. He was a freshman tight end. I think this might have been his second year. And when he came to us, he'd already had both knees scoped, already had both scaphoids fixed in his wrists. He'd been addicted to pain meds. So when he had his first knee scope while he was with us, he said, I don't want any pain meds. That's how I found out he was addicted to them. So then he goes and then we have scope his other knee. So we're already talking at least 6 surgeries that I was aware of, and he's just a sophomore. And so he had a complication with the second knee. It was a simple knee scope, but it just kept swelling. And the kid called me. I think I had given up basketball, but I was at the basketball game. So I went and got him, brought him over because he was right there in the dorm. I brought him over, had Doc look at him. And, that wasn't his surgeon. His surgeon was out of town. And Doc's like, oh, yeah, just put some ice on. I don't see anything big going on. And there really wasn't anything to look at. It wasn't infected. You could tell it wasn't infected. But this kid had a really high pain tolerance. And I knew something wasn't right. So, he went back, he tried to ice it, and half hour later, my phone rings again. Thank goodness I was still at the stadium and not at home or at the basketball arena. So I went and picked him up, and I took him to the ER right there at the orthopedic group. And still, they admitted him because his pain was through the roof. And the next day, his surgeon saw him and was just like, oh, yeah, he's got some swelling. Well, he ended up going in and scoping him. He had one little bitty capillary that was bleeding. And that caused all those problems. And so, probably a week or two later, he came in, and his girlfriend from high school had flown in, and they were going to get married and blah blah blah. So I hear them talk in the hospital about how they want to have 6 kids and da 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 da, and they're going on and on. And so he comes in one day to do his rehab, and I said, hey, you need to come in, we need to talk. And so I said, I heard you you and your future wife talking about all this. I said, is football really that important? I said, we can make you a medical and you can get your education. And so, he did. He opted to not play anymore, which was smart, so he could run around with his kids when when it was time. And he came back a couple of years later with, I think he already had 2 kids by then, after he graduated. And he said, that really meant a lot to him. That if I hadn't talked to him, he'd still try and play. Well, eventually, I would have made it so he couldn't play anymore because, that was our job to look out for their health of the athlete. And it's not just, we got to be smarter than them sometimes.
Yep.
We got to answer for them when they can't.
It's not just about getting them back in, it's knowing when they have to stay out. And those are the hard conversations when you have to tell somebody, listen, this is not what's best for you. Now, obviously, I'm at a high school, so a lot of this will come from the parents, but it's sitting everybody down and saying, this is what's at risk now. And sometimes it's telling the kid it's okay to quit.
Yeah.
A lot of times they feel that pressure. They've been playing
That's
sports
exactly
for so
what he said.
long.
Yep.
They've been playing for so long.
It's all they know.
It's all they know, and they don't understand that. Sometimes it's okay and it's actually better.
Yep.
Well, and ultimately 99% of them are not going to make a career out of their sport.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Yes, it's great to see the big success stories that you've seen, and you've seen those at UTEP. But so many of them, they never make it, but they make it in life, in some other career, some other field. And I think those are probably bigger successes than those pro athletes. I mean, it's great, but
yeah.
so
most of your pro athletes were already gifted athletes, and they just refined, from high school to college and on to their, and they worked hard, so they didn't just get created and went pro.
You have to remind them you're in high school and in college for the education.
Yes.
You're going to need your brain more than you're going to need, your jump shot or your pitch or whatever it is that it is you're doing.
If you can, make some money off of it and go pro with it for a while, that's great. But most of them, that's not reality.
Exactly.
So let's talk a little bit about how the athletic training profession has changed over the years from when you guys started to now. Maybe compare it, like with the education. Now you have the entry-level master's degree. What has changed, or maybe what has stayed the same in the field of athletic training?
What hasn't changed? Oh my goodness. They obviously started a little bit before me, but I remember our athletic training room at Burgess and at UTEP, and we just have so many more modalities. We have more equipment at our disposal, more techniques. And we've lost some of the old techniques. I'm still able to fabricate a brace. I'm still able to fabricate splints or, specialized padding. And I was taught that at, Burgess and at UTEP. It was a skill we used regularly. And so I know that's not something that's taught as much. When I was in high school, we actually made custom mouthpieces for every single football player and wrestler. And that's a skill that, we no longer use. The education has changed when I went to school.
3 classes.
Yeah, we had 3 classes.
2 classes.
2 or 3 classes.
3.
Yeah, the rest was, just your major. I was a health science major, and everything was learned on the job. It was a true internship program, and there were there were no hours. The state said we had to have a certain number of hours, and I think we got those hours in 1 year.
One semester.
We just, you had to be in the training room by 7:30 a.m. You did not leave until the last whirlpool was washed. That horrible hot tub sauna thing that the old Ross Moore building had, that would take us 3 to 4 hours to clean. I hated that thing. And we used to do actual files. We had paper and pens that you would have to write in every treatment, every exam, every diagnosis. And so we really learned by watching. You had to be at all these practices. You had to be there because that was the only way you were going to get that experience. Whereas now, modern student athletic trainers or modern athletic trainers, they have a master's degree program. And so they go through more coursework. Whereas with us, it was all on the job and everything was very hands-on. We did all the physical labor. We were the ice crews in college, setting up, for 2-a-days at football, which I don't know who still does 2-a-days for football at the high school level, right? But, we did that. I remember 3-a-days. So the education has definitely changed because of that experience. Now it's very methodical. You have this class, you're learning this, you're learning this, you're learning this. When it came time for us to study for our state exam or our national certification, we kind of had to go back and say, okay, what did we not see? What did we not learn? And there was very little, but it usually was the stuff that was very book. We knew everything that we could lay our hands on, though. So that has changed. I feel like they do have a better education on the book part. I think us old schoolers have just a better hands-on education. I think it's amazing that athletic trainers can do, dry needling. We have, blood flow restriction therapies. We do a lot of manual therapy. Rehabilitation thoughts have changed. We're not icing anymore. We're not resting them anymore. We're like, nope, get up, let's go. It's time to start. We're rehabbing you right away that day. And we're seeing the benefits of it. I think just overall as medicine evolves, our profession has evolved.
Well, a big thing was back then when we were students, Maria can attest to it. It was just Dave and I. We were the only 2 full-time for 16 sports back then. 15 or 16, I can't remember.
15 sports.
When I was a student trainer at Iowa State, you had your head men's athletic trainer. He had 1 full-time assistant, no graduate assistants. On the women's side, you had your head women's athletic trainer, and she had a graduate assistant. And that was it. And that was at Iowa State. I think we had 26 sports. So as a student athletic trainers, we actually, my senior year, I was assigned to women's track. And so we, as senior student trainers, we ran a training room. And these were the sports out of that training room: wrestling, men's gymnastics. You had men's and women's swimming and diving. You had men's and women's track and field and baseball. And we all helped each other out. We all cleaned our whirlpools at the end of the day. That training room was run just like there was a full-time athletic trainer there. Like if a full-time would have walked in there, they would have walked in, because if it wasn't like that, then we wouldn't have been around. If you didn't keep up with your knowledge, learning as you went, you were out. Yeah. That's just the way it was back then. Even, when I was a student, when Maria was a student, that's the way we treated them. We expected them to, do what we did, So you're there when we open,
and you're there until you closed. And I was 18 years old. I had just graduated, and they handed me the keys to Memorial Gym and said, here, you're going to be in charge of women's volleyball. Go take care of them. And, I was like, well, as a freshman, you're like, well, I don't know what to do. Well, you're going to learn really quick. And so we studied and we asked questions, but it was our responsibility to figure out, to learn and to research with books. This was before the internet, with books. Okay. There's no internet. Yep. And, how to evaluate for that injury. And then we'd come, to Dawn and say, okay, Dawn, so-and-so is going to come in to see you. And they said, what do you think it is? And you'd have to go over, this is what I'm seeing in my evaluation. This is what I think it is. And then she'd yell at us if we had it wrong. And say, no, you're supposed to check this and this. But that's how you learned. They corrected us then and there. And then it's like, what's your plan? Well, I'm thinking we do these exercises. This is how we'll rehab her. I'm thinking we'll, modify practice this way. No, are you crazy? This is what you guys do. Okay. But that's, no, I'm kidding. But that's how we learned. It was very much on the job, figured out, but we had that constant communication with them. If that meant trotting someone out to football or, oh, they're out at the track, well, then we're taking them there. And so it was a very much hands-on education, but you learned so much more because you had to do that research and you had to do that evaluation. Then you watch them do the evaluation and they're like, okay, yeah, this is where, you were off, or this is where you were wrong. And it just really solidified it for us.
And we didn't have an entry-level master's program back then. We had to do 1,800 hours in the training room.
That's what it was.
And we learned doing those 1,800 hours. I think the entry-level master's has helped the profession, but it also has hurt it. Because I think it deters people from going into athletic training because they don't want to do the master's program. They want to learn hands-on. That's how they want to do it. I think we're lucky in Texas that you can get a state license and you can practice. And I think that's something that we need to push harder.
Yeah, good. I have one last question. So athletic training is a lot about collaboration, right? You can't be on your own little island, since you are responsible for pretty much the whole athlete and pretty much almost all the healthcare for the athlete. So talk a little bit about how you had that collaboration, whether it's with the coaches, with other healthcare providers, Don, for you, with scouts from the NFL teams and everything. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, I mean, I was probably the middle person for just about everything. You have to, and go over your injury reports with your coaches. As the director of sports medicine, or when I was the head athletic trainer at both positions, I have multiple coaches calling me. When I was in charge of football, I still had all those coaches calling me. Once I was done with football, it was a little bit easier to get out and about. But, just working with so many different people. I worked with you guys here at the clinic. We had dermatologists. We actually had a pediatrician back in the day, and he was invaluable, because a lot of these kids that come in, they're 18 years old. Well, you see your pediatrician till you're 18, right?
Yep.
So he'd help us a ton with physicals, and, he actually had a Saturday morning clinic. So I utilized that, especially during football season, if I had a sick kid. So a multitude of different doctors, other healthcare professionals, as far as in mental health, that wasn't that big when we first got in, but it sure did develop. Then we had a committee that would deal with that from a certain coach was assigned to that committee. You had your senior women's administrator at the counseling office from on campus, other counselors from, just a multitude of people to work on that, the mental health aspect of it. Working with our strength coaches to collaborate on a lot of our rehab. This is where they are with us. This is what they can do up in the weight room, but don't let them do that yet, because I always loved working with our strength coaches, because they'd be like, can we do this yet? Oh, not yet, but you could do this. Oh, great. Or they go, well, what about this? Oh, yeah, that's perfect. So, you got to have a vast knowledge of a lot of different things. And working, I always had a great time with my football scouts, because I always told the truth. When Coach Kugler was actually a player when I was first here, and it was funny when he came in and had he was already here and had a recruiting night at State Line, and Maria was at State Line, and I was at State Line. We were eating with our families. And I was like, come on, let's go see Coach Kugler. So I walked in and goes, oh, there's my two favorite trainers. So it was awesome. But that's how much he respected us. I was only there for his senior year. And then when he came back as the head football coach, he goes, Don, what did he say? He said, you're the most respected athletic trainer in the NFL. And I said, why? Because I tell the truth. And he goes, exactly. Because there's a lot of pressure on talking to the scouts and a lot of different programs. But, I didn't care, if that kid was a turd for me, he wasn't going to get better when you put $1 million in his pocket, but then there were kids like, oh man, you can't go wrong with this guy. I wish he had a little bit more talent, but yeah, give him a fair shot. Look at him.
Yeah.
You know, great kid. You know, so it's so many different things. But I always had a lot of fun with it. You know, all the different.
So Maria, your collaboration, you're right next to UMC, so you
Yes.
have all that like right there, because you always think it's like, well, Jefferson's a little bit into hood, it is the lower income, but you probably have the best support from a medical standpoint.
I actually do. Really lucky. And I think part of it is, one, being in the field so long, you get to develop these relationships. I haven't, moved around to a bunch of schools. So, the doctors and everybody kind of knows, this is exactly who we're talking to. This is where we're going. And so we're very fortunate. Since the beginning of my career, we've had orthopedics who have those Saturday morning clinics, which is invaluable. I hope they realize how grateful we are to them, that we can send the kids there. We are very lucky now. We are participants with the Texas Tech Sports Medicine Fellowship Program. So for the past 10 years, we have a sports medicine fellow assigned to Jefferson Silva High School. And that fellow is with us for every Friday night, every varsity football game, and every Saturday morning we have clinic. And they'll see any athlete. So we joke that it's usually Saturday morning is for the volleyball team. And usually they just need some reassurance. They're such tremendous athletes. But they'll come in and they'll look over these kids from the whole week. It could be a JV kid, it could be a cross country runner, and they'll just do a great job taking care of them. This past year, last year, we started with UMC Rehab Services. They started a sports medicine clinic, and their physical therapist is Dr. Bianca Vigliante, who is a Silva alumni. And she was an amazing soccer player and was a college athlete. So it was great because then she came back and wanted to bring that program to Jefferson as well. So she's also there on Friday nights on the sideline. And what's great is she's there Saturday morning with the clinic. So if I have a kid who's just not progressing with the rehab we're having, or if parent wants to, do something else, or if I just need a different idea, a different view, she's there on Saturdays to provide that, and she'll send the kid the workout and something that we can follow along. And again, with so many of these high school kids, especially those from Silva Magnet, they want to become health professionals. So they get to this very informal setting where they can talk to a physician or physical therapist and find out, okay, what do I need to do next? So how do I get to become you? And so that's really great for us. And we've always had great relationships, obviously, here with Spine and Rehab, because, they're not too far from us. And so with, Marcos Pargas, there's so many physical therapists that we can just call and say, hey, I've got a kid on your side of town. Because that's one of the things also, with high schools, it's not just the kids in your neighborhood that go to your school. That's a huge change I've seen. Before, everybody was in the Jefferson area. We knew where to send them. I have kids from the west side, the valley, the both lower and upper valley, the northeast. We have a tremendous amount of our Silva Magnet students from the northeast, and so you have to make those connections other than just across the street. We always used to joke, well, let's send them across the street. You got Dr. Corning over at Texas Tech Ortho or UMC Ortho across the street. We'll send them there. No, we have to have those connections all over the city, and then you have to collaborate with parents. And that's a whole different ballgame. Mm-hmm. Some are really great and supportive and understand, and some are like, well, then they can just stop playing. And so you're just, trying to navigate that. And that has changed. Parenting has changed, obviously, in 30 years, and the way, kids are treated. You also have to deal with your school administration and teachers, especially when it comes to concussions. We have to have meetings and say, okay, this is what the student can or cannot do in class. When a kid gets a concussion the day before state testing, which is required, there's a lot of hoops that you have to go through to get that student, excused, and then put them on the list for retesting. And so the collaboration is just in all different ways. But our fellows definitely make it easier, having access to our PT so easily. And I feel like in all athletic trainers, you have to be humble. You need to know when you need to call someone else. Yeah. Tom Lechtenberg, who's at Angelo State University now, you can call him up and say, okay, why? Give me an idea, man. What have you tried this? You can call even some of the younger ones. They know newer techniques sometimes. How why is this not working right? And so it's really all about collaboration. That's why it's called a sports medicine team. Mm-hmm. We're just the gear in the middle.
Definitely. I think as an athletic trainer, when you're in college, you learn how to communicate with the physicians.
Yes.
You learn that they're people, you see them outside of the office, you get to know them, you learn how to communicate. When I went to work in a clinic, because I had that environment, it was so easy for me to communicate with the orthopedic surgeons because I had already done it in college and they were always there. So it was really, really easy for me, whereas the PT struggled.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was one of the biggest
Mhm.
differences between the AT and the PT. We weren't afraid to go up and tell them,
And start
What-
talking to a doctor.
yeah, what happened? Like, I can't get the swelling out. Did you like drain it all? Even though it was dumb, but then they'd explain to you probably what happened.
Right.
So it was really easy to communicate with the physicians coming from that side.
Mhm.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys. I think this was a great conversation. So that was another episode of our podcast. So thank you, Don, Bonnie, Maria, for being here and being my guests.
All right,
Thank you for
thanks
having
me.
us. Appreciate
Yep.
it.